The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Do you want to build more real connections and community in your business? That's the topic today, and we are going to dive into that with our guests. We are live, so if you have questions or comments, send them along. I'm Steven Skash here again with Tulio Siragusa and Mike Lusky. Mike, introduce our guest today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steven. And to answer your question, yes, I do want to build more connections, and we're going to do just that. So we'd like to welcome you once again, to another episode of the Bliss Business Podcast. Really appreciate our listeners and our followers tuning in. So what's on tap for today? So today we have a guest who has truly transformed the way businesses communicate and connect with their communities. Christopher G. Fox, he's the founder of Ideas-Led Growth. He's spent over 2 decades pioneering the integration of 3 really interesting components. It's the integration of empathy, ethics, and strategic growth, and implementing that into different business practices. He's also the visionary of the GRACE method, which you'll hear a lot more about later today. It's a groundbreaking approach that helps redefine business communication to help make your communication be more intentional, also be more focused on humans or more human-centered, and also being a little bit more purpose-driven. So then to sum it up, in this episode, you'll gain valuable insights into Christopher's GRACE method, which will help you, again, build like those stronger relationships in your business. And by applying his strategies, you can expect to foster deeper connections, lead with greater integrity, and achieve sustainable success that also aligns with your business values, which we know is really key. So Chris, I gotta say, I'm personally thrilled to have you today with your expertise in fostering community and connections, because it's exactly what we're going to explore today. And I couldn't think of a more perfect guest. So with that, let's welcome Christopher G. Fox to the Bliss Business Podcast. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. That was a fantastic introduction. I really appreciate it. It's great to be on here with you, Mike, with Steven, with Tulio. I'm very excited for this. I've already seen it as the high point of my week, and I'm really excited to be here on this Thursday morning.
No pressure after that introduction.
Love it. Love it.
I will try to meet expectations.
Chris, when thinking about this show topic, we've been doing a series of shows in the past week or so on community and connection building. I was kind of caught up on the idea of how much easier it is to create community since the internet came along, but how much more disconnecting we've become. Do you agree with that? Or is that just my cynicism creeping into my thoughts? Or are we getting more disconnected despite this technology?
Yeah, I think it's one of those odd situations where both things are true. The opportunity for connection is unbelievably magnified by all of the digital technologies that have, if you look back to almost prehistory in the late 90s, as some of these digital technologies really started to hit the mainstream in the business world through the first generation of websites, the social sites, and now wherever we seem to be in this interim period as AI gets going, there's so many ways for people to connect with each other. The other side of the coin is that there are a lot of challenges with the primary platforms that have inserted themselves into the way we connect with each other. I think back, a little bit of history behind me. So I think back to the way I used to interact with people on message boards, and there was this thing called internet relay chat. You'd have these chat rooms where people based on a particular interest could all talk about a certain topic. There were listservs. There were all these things that were like, they're in some ways really recognizable. I think most people, if you've got a few years less in the can than I do, you're not even going to know what I'm talking about with these things.
I've been there. I was there.
over time, platforms, the big social platforms, have inserted themselves, and they've also created these what I call false incentives, where instead of chasing connection, they gamify, they use all of the sort of made to stick behavioral engineering type things to get you excited, not about your connections, but about your likes. It's not what are people saying, but how many comments did I get? And that shift does, I think, sometimes distort the picture and create a sense where the opportunity is there to connect, but you also have to fight through the noise of the engagement statistics that can look impressive, but they don't actually mean anything from a human connection standpoint.
Speaking about that, Chris, sometimes the comment stream on social media can be quite disconcerting. Do you think we've made it too easy to make quote unquote disconnecting comments to each other because we aren't face to face?
I think there's something to that. I think there's something about the safety of being behind a screen and a keyboard and not having to see that person's face, especially if you're going to make a comment that is aggressive or negative in some way. It's a lot harder to like the say it to my face model. It's a lot harder to do that in a face-to-face interaction than it is when you're sitting at a keyboard, you had a bad day at work, it's 9 p.m., you see something that triggers a negative reaction and you post a snarky, mean, aggressive comment. So I think there's a piece of it that's that, and then the other thing that which will continue to emerge in this conversation, I think, is that if you go to LinkedIn as a prime example, and that's where I spend any of the time I spend on social media now is LinkedIn. There are so many tools integrated within LinkedIn to create meaningless AI generated comments based on things, because the LinkedIn playbook says you're supposed to comment on lots of things all the time. And so there's kind of another bucket of there's negative or aggressive comments. There's also a bucket of empty comments that cheapen and evacuate human connection because they don't come from anyone. They come from a statistical engine that's predicting what the next word should be.
Yeah, let's have a little discussion on this. I know, Mike, we've been talking about this. Well, why do you think, Mike, like we're so disconnected?
Yeah, Stephen. So yeah, I think you're going to see some passion maybe come out here because this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And so, yeah, I think the answer to your first question is yes. We are, I think, more disconnected. And to answer your second question, I think it kind of breaks down into a couple of factors, some external factors, and then maybe even some internal factors. And yeah, it'd be interesting to maybe discuss these, see if there's agreement or perhaps disagreement. But just like I think Chris was stating, the over-reliance on digital communication versus more face-to-face communication. I also think that an external factor is the type of lifestyle that maybe we lead, having a fast-paced lifestyle. And then breaking up of relationships, I think, has occurred because of even urbanization and mobility, right? We're traveling and moving so much. And then I feel like there's just cultural shifts.
We've lost that village that Tulio always talks about, maybe a little bit, right?
Yeah. We have, but I also think from another point of view, we've always wanted to speak our mind, but in the village, it was not acceptable to just speak your mind because that could cause a lot of division. So
you still had connection. You had connection as a little bit of a goal still, right?
Right. So yeah, we value the connection. So we held back because it's like, I don't want to destroy this connection. It's a small community, especially in a village. But on social media, it seems as though that goes out the window sometimes. It's like, I don't care. I don't know who this person is because you're on sort of a anonymous to a certain degree, right? So a little bit, I think of that as happening. The courage to speak up, but without thinking of the impact it's going to have. It's just, I just need to get it out because I'm stressed,
Yeah, no, it's an interesting, it's again that dual situation of, on the one hand, and Tulio, I really like your point that there's also something that is liberating about not being within that small network where you feel constrained by your connections. There are things that you can't or shouldn't say, even if you believe them. And I think there's there's a logical reason why a synonym for the word connection is ties, because you can be tied in a good way or you can be tied in a negative way. Sometimes freeing those ties is intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually freeing to be away from them. But then the other side of that freedom can come back around and become a situation where you're not only free from the constraints, but you're free from some of the norms that are actually positive in terms of just treating people with kindness, decency, and respect.
Yeah, and some of those, things, unfortunately, have just sort of, gone away. Yeah, and then it sort of makes me, think about like, okay, well, then what are some of the internal factors that, then so it's with the technology and everything that we have, we can reach bigger populations, which should be easier, but yet it's not. And so I kind of feel like it comes down to, conscience in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe like that village scenario, you're much more conscious of having to maintain that connection. And then, the conscience could eventually like lose feeling or become callous after so many repetitions of not experiencing that. So I feel like that's like one internal factor. And then I feel like the other one is just connecting is hard and it takes effort. And I feel also like we're just so tired that it's like, you know what, it's okay. And then the problem just, perpetuates, right? It just sort of remains the same. And so breaking out of those internal factors influencing us is key. So I think there's definitely hope, right? We have the tools. Do we just recognize what actually is going on? And I think it's, good. It's possible to reverse it.
Hopefully. I like that optimism. Yeah, but in order for that to happen, we have to do that work.
Yeah, we have to do the work.
We got to do the work.
I think that freedom, like you mentioned, Chris, it's ultimately good. Right? I think that's like just evolution needs that to find its proximity to the higher good, to higher purpose, that kind of thing. Does that resonate with you at all? Like that, we have to have that kind of freedom.
It does. Yeah, I would say that it's a net positive. It certainly has worked out as a net positive in my relationships at all levels of my life. So I want to be fair about that while acknowledging that there are these challenges, there are these interfering forces that they create interference, like weird incentives, like product features that encourage disconnection, and similar factors that on the one hand, it's great that we have these platforms and we can connect with each other. On the other hand, we are in the hands and beholden to what the owners of these platforms decide to do and what they want and their own business objectives. So
yeah,
it's that.
I know that. And I think like if we're talking about like conscious capitalism, and if they had more of that overall, just what's in the best interest for all the stakeholders involved with their platform, maybe there'd just be a little more thought and care to push love into some aspect of what they're doing versus, since we're in the advertising business, it's all about impressions. It's all about getting you hooked. It's all about engagements. It's, the more extreme, the more reaction we get, and, the more ad impressions we get off of that. So they're always chasing the ad impressions on the social platforms, instead of chasing something that's like, a higher purpose.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of that, certainly in the world of advertising, the idea of getting someone's attention is considered valuable. The question that interests me and that comes back to a lot of the things that I do in my work are, great, what are you going to do with that attention once you have it? Are you going to squander it by doing nothing other than getting more attention again and again and again? Or is there a point in that process between getting attention and establishing relationship that you will add value in a way that actually creates relationship?
That's a really good point, which actually kind of connects with, it sounds like, what you were saying there, that's like a really good principle or, guidepost for companies and their communications. And so maybe turning to, the business environment a little bit more and the work that you've done. There's a lot of companies perhaps today that are just, trying to stay out of the fray or not catch, a stray and get caught up in the middle of something. And so maybe, how would you, respond to, for example, the climate that we're in, right? Is kind of a very complicated community and hard for building connections. So how does the climate that we're in complicate building connection? And then also to your other point about, almost that guidepost, what principles would you give an organization to help navigate, a situation smoothly?
Yeah, those are two interesting and complicated questions.
For sure.
I guess I'll go backwards, and I'll start first of all with what the kinds of things that I'm saying to clients about this period that we're in of on the one hand wanting to accumulate impressions, accumulate attention, but on the other hand not just wanting but needing to build relationships. I tell my clients some pretty counterintuitive things, like figure out ways to ignore the numbers first place. Really circle back and think that there's value in the anecdotes, there's value in the soft data, that, well, it doesn't really matter if you've published a piece of thought leadership that gets tens of thousands of views, hundreds of thousands of views from an audience that is irrelevant to your buying process. It's fun, it's nice, sure, it's great to have those numbers, but it's not really relevant. You will actually, this is something I will say to clients, that sometimes they start off, they're shocked, then they get it and they see it starting to work. You would do better to figure out, apply some effort and thinking how to get that piece of thought leadership into the hands of the 100 most influential decision makers at this point in time in your business. Get it to them, use it as a conversation starter. And it really is, like, at this point we're talking about really breaking or kind of permeating that membrane between sales and marketing, getting that direct feed to decision makers who will benefit from the thought leadership and ultimately make those decisions that are buying decisions in your favor as a publisher of that thought leadership. And that is, on the one hand, it sounds obvious, like, yes, communicate with your buyers. Don't worry so much about the general public if you're not engaged in a broad public relations campaign. But on the other hand, there are a lot of things that come with it. Like, all of a sudden, what if you as a CMO now need to report back that there's been this massive dip in impressions, in traffic, in all of those things that tend to get rolled up in a dashboard of reports on marketing results. Justifying that can be a little scary.
Yeah, for sure. We talk a lot too about, like, the metrics that matter. And so it might not be so many that you could get 10,000 clicks and all that stuff, but really it's what's the overall value that was in those 10,000, just one or two. So it's an interesting idea of just, ignoring the metrics. And I'm always trying to figure out, well, are there other metrics we should be focused on, that are more like love-based in some way or connection-based, which we do a lot of financial marketing. And it is a very empathetic space, as you know. And sometimes with some of our marketing, like we're marketing an ETF or something, there's not a metric for that final sale. So we really have to look at just all these other soft metrics, like you say, in order to determine, is this person connected with us? Is this, engaged traffic? And so that gets really tricky to kind of weed through all that, especially with different social platforms and stuff. But it is that goal of just ultimately for us as an agency is how can we make sure we've made that connection on a deeper level? What What would you say are some tips for people on making that sort of deeper connection?
The thing that I focus on the most is thought leadership. Now that's a kind of a big buzzword in the industry, so we can start to peel the onion on what does thought leadership mean. But essentially, I'll talk about the why part first. Why I believe that thought leadership is relevant, if it's done well, not just as a buzzword, but done well. I'll get to that in a minute. But you are really, in a serious and empathetic way, understanding that you are delivering, whether it's writing, webinars, other types of thought leadership formats, to people who are in the midst of making an incredibly high stakes decision. Now, the world that I work in, the client base that I serve is institutional finance. So when we say high stakes, like I'm not kidding. I'm talking with companies whose clients are putting hundreds of billions of dollars at stake, sometimes even trillions. I do have some fairly large clients. Whether it's based on a particular transaction technology, some kind of servicing platform, some other set of administrative services that allow those investments to flow, or that those transactions to flow through a system. That, not money isn't everything, but it certainly is a pretty good indicator that those are some seriously high stakes. And what that means is the people making those decisions, like, oh, should we migrate to a new platform that supports this, or should we engage a new service provider to help us with some compliance or regulatory issue? Like, you are putting a lot on the line. You're putting a lot of dollars on the line, and those are dollars that are often not yours. They're your investors, and you have that fiduciary and even moral responsibility to take care of those assets. But you're also putting your own career on the line. If you screw up a decision like that, bye, that's it. Like, you're really going to do serious damage to your current job and probably your career if you make a huge misstep on a major compliance or regulatory issue, for example. So the reason why I'm going down that path is that when I talk about thought leadership, I really believe that it's content that takes the idea that the intended audience needs to make incredibly high stakes decisions, treats that decision making with seriousness and with empathy, and delivers insight, whether it's alternative explanations of challenges and issues, proposals for solutions, outlooks on different trends that you should be watching. They're not happening now, they're happening in 5 years. All of those kinds of things are predicated on the idea that you take your intended audience's decision-making seriously. And that's why I place that strong emphasis on thought leadership. And it's actually the definition that I give when I say, thought leadership isn't just long content. Thought leadership is content. The easy and tricky thing to say is, well, it needs to be thinking and it needs to be leading. And if it doesn't think and it doesn't lead, it's not thought leadership. But down to the next level, it's also that sense of, you need to be putting content out there that supports your prospective audience's decision-making process. And the more of an ally you are by providing them meaningful, objective, relevant, and insightful information about the types of decisions they make, the more you build affinity and trust, you get those relationships.
So I think I've got something to tee it up for you, Chris, because as you were talking about, certain things that have to be in that thought leadership, there's some values that I think came to mind as you were talking about those. And we talk a lot about values on the show, like purpose and empathy and authenticity. So to try to maybe tee it up, I'm curious, can you talk about how authenticity, plays a role in, having to create that thought leadership and then being able to create a connection with your intended audience?
Yeah, I do think there's an authenticity to it where you're saying in as clear and coherent a way as possible, what do you think about a particular scenario or a particular asset class or a particular type of transaction, and you're communicating it in a way that, yes, there's messaging. Yes, there's a layer of packaging to it. It's not raw authenticity. And I go down a whole full of philosophical rabbit hole of why I don't even believe that's a thing. Regardless, the idea of you're positioning yourself not as an attention getter, but as a truth teller. And I think that's the bridge between the kinds of things that I was talking about in the question you just asked, Mike, around authenticity.
And I think in an industry where you may have to talk about an asset class that may not lead to flows necessarily in your direction, but in other areas, it's probably really difficult, to put that view out there. But those that do, it seems like, those that are really authentic with their view, build that trust, right? And I think the appreciation by the audience grows as you do that. And when markets shift, continuing to stay with that authenticity, in the end, benefits the true thought leader. So yeah. It's super important. Yeah.
This is a very timely conversation around authenticity. In fact, just a few days ago, I got a report from Google. I get a report about what's the most trending blog on my blog. And it was the one around authenticity and empathy. And authenticity without empathy can be really detrimental to yourself and to others. There's this mindset that it's just about being authentic, 100% authentic. Well, you may not always want to be 100% authentic with everything that's going on in your mind, right? So without empathy, I think part of the problem is that people are striving for authenticity without thinking about how it impacts what they say, how it impacts other people. So I think it's important to marry, empathy with that authenticity, right? There's some things that we think are reality about how we think that don't necessarily bridge us or connect us. If I'm just mad all the time and I just want to beat people up, well, that might be my authentic way of thinking. But if I just put that out constantly, you're going to end up creating people that stay away from you, right? You actually create separation instead of connection. So, if I know that in the back of my mind, I have some anger issues, but authentically I care and I want to connect, but I want to be myself, then there's empathy built in there, which builds connection. Are you seeing some of this disconnect a little bit where authenticity is all out without thinking about the sort of emotional intelligence behind also being empathetic with your authenticity?
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those reasons why authenticity, you can go down a certain distance on that path, and then you start to get into that zone that you're talking about, Tulio, where it's like there's a difference between authenticity that is intentionally crafted to express your authentic intent to help someone versus authenticity that's just blowing off steam because you're either permanently or temporarily mad at something.
Yeah.
Chris, can you explain your ideas-led growth grace method to the audience?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And it's just to connect the dots a little more closely. One of the reasons why I chose GRACE, which is an acronym for the method that I'll explain really quickly, is that I do see that relationship between grace as providing unexpected goodness, right? This sense of grace, and I don't really mean it in a theological sense. I understand that it has theological resonance, and we don't need to talk about any of that right now. But there is that sense of just graceful giving without expectation of return, giving the unexpected. Those are all kinds of things that are associated with grace. I also like the idea that grace can be used in the sense of easy and fluid movement, and that's why I chose this word. And I was so, as you choose these words, it's like, does the acronym drive the concept, or does the concept drive the acronym? It's always a little.
I use that grace term a lot in actually connecting on that. We need to have a little more grace when we don't agree with someone. I mean, it's a very, goes right into what we're talking about here, connecting and community building. But you have to have that grace to you might not agree with someone, and we see that all over the place. But how do you bridge that gap? The thing I go to is grace.
I like that a lot. And so go ahead, Tulio.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree 100%, because in the past we've used the term being tactful in a situation where it gets perhaps conflicting. But tact doesn't necessarily tie into the idea of gratitude. You can still be grateful that someone has a completely opposite opinion of you, that they're expressing it, and it might even trigger you to have that opinion. But where grace comes in is this idea that I can be grateful and also tactful at the same time.
Yeah,
and handle it in such a way that's loving.
Yeah, and I like that, and that's why I wanted all of those different things that the word grace evokes to kind of float around in this methodology that I have. So in ideas-led growth, in Chris Fox speak, what grace stands for is to generate, reorient, act, communicate, and expand. So you have to start off your thought leadership by generating ideas, and it's really it's not digging them out of somewhere. It's you really are working together as a team to create these ideas that jump you beyond conventional wisdom. It can be about a very, very specific niche topic, inner workings of how ETFs are constructed, inner workings of the corporate bond or loans market. These things can be extremely technical and extremely niche, but there's always ideas and insights that are available to generate around that, not out of groupthink and chasing the latest topic, but getting beyond the conventional wisdom. The next piece of it is, when I say reorient, this is an important piece that often gets missed in thought leadership. Thought leadership isn't just about messaging and making content. Thought leadership really only has impact when you reorient what you do. That's the R part. So you have all that thinking, those ideas that you bring through the generation process need to reorient your business and be assimilated into how you do business, how you talk about your business, what you offer, the way you interact with clients. That reorientation is essential, because otherwise it's just words. There's no thinking and there's no leadership. Acting is also really important. It's great to say stuff. Are you doing it? Are you really doing that? So you have these great ideas about maybe one of these very niche financial topics. Do you have a proof of concept? Do you have client work that demonstrates those things? Do you have concrete things that you can talk about so that your thought leadership doesn't feel like just empty, speculative, philosophical musing? There's a place for that, but I feel like it needs to be grounded. And the way that I work with my clients is that just getting out there with a bunch of edgy ideas that you can't back up with action and that don't have any impact to reorient your business is a very surface level thing. So I've talked about all these things, and you're probably wondering, well, like, where's the thought leadership? Here we go. It's communicate. It's the C. And the C is really important. It's not just communicating, broadcast, spam everyone, make sure everyone in the world hears your thought leadership. It's that idea of narrowcasting it to actual decision makers and communicating with that purpose behind it. And then the final piece of this ideas-led growth process, you can probably tell if you really even think about, well, what is the name ideas-led growth and what does it mean? It means that ideas drive your growth. And the final piece of grace is to expand your market. A lot of times companies will publish this white paper. We're kind of tired. We'll wait. We'll drift along to the next topic. A few more months go by. We'll put up a blog. It's just this sort of drifty, nothing really happens, rather than intentionally building on these concepts, the ideas that emerge from the process, to fuel your business growth, your next wave of products, the next market segment that you'll begin working with, the next whatever it might be. That final piece of expansion is what matters. And so, when I talk about what characterizes this process, yes, it's the 5-step process: generate, reorient, act, communicate, and expand. But there's also an emotional tenor to it. I find this all the time, especially with new clients who have tried thought leadership before. You can almost see it on the subject matter experts' faces. It's like a balloon deflated. They're like, this again? We really have to go through all this? I hate doing thought leadership. It's always a mess. The writers never get it right. It ends up taking much more of my time than anything else. There's never really a process or a reason for doing it. It feels like we're just checking a box. I really want to reverse that whole thing with a very clear method, but also, the way that I always say it, and this is my weird little pun about the ideas-led growth, is to get on the idea sled. And I say that because it's fast and it's fun and it's fearless and it's forward-looking and it leads to forward momentum. And so the ideas-led growth process, GRACE is the acronym, but being on the adopting this GRACE approach means get on the idea sled. Let's get on this sled together, go for a ride, have some fun, get some ideas out there, and get traction, get real impact.
Definitely sounds like you've experienced a lot of those frustrations and pain points you mentioned. We hear it over and over again. So it sounds like with that method, it's an opportunity to really break through, right, and change the kind of thought leadership that's produced. So, Chris, I did want to ask a question about something on your site. It mentions on your site that ideas about change are the most powerful force for driving business growth. So, can you talk a little bit more about that thought?
Yeah. So, I think that's really a message about innovation. When you have an innovation to bring something to market, whether it's like a massive large scale innovation like AI or blockchain or crypto, or whether it's a very low level innovation like how are we going to generate a very specific micro set of reports that a certain regulator needs, being able to do that in a way that is more efficient, more cost effective, less painful, all of those kind of positive business outcomes. Inside there really is an idea about change. You are developing something, you're bringing something to market that represents an idea for better. That idea for better is what fuels your business growth. And it also creates an opportunity for you to be an advocate for what that better means in the world. And that's the thought leadership thing.
I think that, like you mentioned how like people are a little bit tired, thought leadership, we've got to go this route again or whatever. But when you have that kind of higher purpose or that, that better the world and, the change we want to make in the world, I feel like that's what gives energy a lot of times to that thought leadership is like, once you define that element within your company or within yourself, then it's the energy that you're using that was so difficult for you now just becomes like, oh no, I'm passionate about this.
Yeah, it's passionate about the outcomes, and it's also being able to experience joy during the process. Like, oh no, this is not yet another badly managed project. This is something that's actually fun. I feel like I'm sitting side by side with a thinking partner who's helping me think better and produce things that will actually deliver my impact out into the world. That's pretty exciting. And I think that really energizes thought leaders.
I think ultimately it's beyond just thought leadership. It's about establishing authority. That's ultimately what it's about, right? Because once you establish that, then you're the go-to, you're the trusted source. Then that's ultimately where you sort of create an environment where people like can just go with what you have to say because you've done all the work and you've established authority around it. Where do you think most businesses fail around this in terms of their communication? What mistakes do most businesses make around this?
Yeah, I think a lot of the mistakes come from this mentality that has emerged, and it really got traction in as people started to adjust to the COVID-19 pandemic. They're like, oh, well, what do we do? We can't go to events. We can't do all these other things. Let's start publishing a lot of stuff as a way to generate relationships. Let's create thought leadership. And it's started to devolve into an activity for its own sake, not for these higher purpose things that we've been discussing in this really enjoyable conversation, but just, oh, well, I'm a mid-level marketing manager and this is on my annual objectives that I've got to put out 3 pieces of thought leadership for the area that I cover. So I do it. Or, oh, I better feed that algorithm. It's hungry. It wants things from me. I have to do it. Any of those obligation driven incentives trigger mistakes. And I think that that's a big mistake. Another common mistake, way too many cooks in the kitchen. You get people, and this is something that will happen in large financial institutions. You've got the marketing team, you've got someone from communications, you've got people from within operations, you've got the subject matter experts, then you've got the people that they also feel that they need to consult within the organization. Then you have legal and compliance, and all these people all over the place. Can be a very painful, unrewarding process. And by the time you get to the end, you feel not energized, but deflated. A lot of that stuff is unnecessary and can be taken out of the process when you start up front with really clear outcomes and intentions, and you drive to those intentions, not drive to following a process or chasing an algorithm.
Yeah, I think we're all nodding our heads here, just dealing with all those as a marketing agency and working in high compliance areas. We're just like, yeah, it's like a anti-marketing force against you sometimes. But yeah, no, well said. So if anyone on the is just listening to this, we're all nodding our heads as Chris was going on there about that. Chris, I feel like the default mode for a lot of businesses is sort of this emotionless, antiseptic version of what they could be, like you're kind of hinting at here, with all those people coming to play, and everyone's pulling out the antiseptic wipes for everything that they're trying to say here. And it's almost like trying very hard not to succeed sometimes. And I think putting more focus on that connection and community building is kind of a big step in the right direction, because ultimately this is kind of a focus that brings businesses in closer proximity to love without saying the word love. But what do you say to those who say love doesn't belong in business?
I disagree with that. I think it does. I use that word pretty heavily. I publish a weekly newsletter. That was actually a big piece of what I talked about in the newsletter that I published this morning. It was about, why does it make sense to resist what I call the content industrial complex to generate real and meaningful thought leadership? It's not just resistance for the sake of being a contrarian, it's an act of love. And I said that outright. I believe it's really important. I think you can look at a business as kind of like a network of different nodes. And if those nodes are all no nodes, they're, in other words, inhibitor nodes rather than yes nodes and amplifier nodes, you end up with dismal results. And what I would say is those yes nodes or those amplifier nodes, they function because there's a level of love, and we don't necessarily talk about it. Sometimes people feel weird or creepy about it, or it just seems like it's off color and not in this antiseptic business language. I don't care. I'll say it anyway. Like we can all say it. We can say what we want. So let's talk about it and actually advocate for that and bring that out. Most of the people I work with, somewhere along the line, they actually love what they do. Hopefully that's not in the past tense. They still do, and they still will. But bringing that out with joyful processes, or I love the idea that you bring about Bliss, the Bliss Business Podcast and what it stands for. Yeah, all those things: bliss, love, joy, grace. You're not supposed to talk about anything like that in the context of business, except yes, you are, and you should.
Yeah,
Stephen, you know how the Americans Got Talent's got the golden buzzer? We need to get the Blisser buzzer. When a guest comes on with a Blisser, we just press the Blisser buzzer.
Yeah, he's talking about writing about this morning or whatever, and I'm just like, okay, I need to read that because
yeah,
and so do our listeners. So, Chris, where can our listeners find out more about what you do and find out and reach you online?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways to do that. So you can go to the Ideas-Led Growth website. That's ideasledgrowth.com, no punctuation, hyphens, anything like that, just ideasledgrowth.com. I'm easily findable on LinkedIn, especially if you're watching this. You'll see my face. You'll see my face on LinkedIn. Christopher Fox. I'm the only managing partner of Ideas-Led Growth that you'll find on LinkedIn. So connect with me there. I tend to cross-post a lot, and you can get to my newsletter and subscribe to that either through LinkedIn or through the website.
Chris, thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to our listeners who joined live. Remember to subscribe, as we have 3 different shows a week on a variety of topics related to empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. That's it for today, and we will see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.